Hello, Geeks and Gamers. Matt Lemke here at Con on the Cob with Through Gamer Goggles. And today we are going to chat a little bit with Lester Smith about his publishing company, Popcorn Press. And it's popcornpress.com, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
How often does the horror anthology come out?
It's a once-a-year thing. We started 5 years ago. I don't get to do a Halloween party, and I really love poetry and fiction as well. And this was, in fact, I should say I was two-term president of the Wisconsin Fellowship of Poets. So kind of got this mission to get poetry back on the street, sort of thing. There are a lot of people doing different efforts, and this is my way. I usually say that I think about 100 years ago, academics stole poetry from the common person. Because if you look at the 1800s, people were reading poetry at home.
Right.
They were enjoying poetry. They were writing stuff to
It might
each
have
other.
happened earlier than that, actually. Might have.
You think so?
Yeah.
I tend to think it was around 1910, right around Ezra Pound. I kind of look at as this pivotal figure who, the burst of free verse, and suddenly that was one thing that made it less accessible to people because they would look at just lines on a page and wonder.
I kind of think, I don't know if it's less accessible, but I think there's other things like technology that got in the way too, like TV.
Okay.
Which is actually a little bit later, but I was thinking things that kind of got in the way were, we were busy settling, we were working our rear ends off in the United States with the Industrial Revolution we were having and where we were at. And that could have been part of it.
Okay.
But I don't know the history the way you do either.
At any event, I think that there have been some figures in poetry like Carl Sandburg, for example, who was accessible to everyone, and you read his stuff, or Robert Frost, right?
Yeah.
That those are things that we encounter in high school, and they're not that tough to read. And then you read something like 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, and it took me years to figure out, to get into it at all.
Right.
So I combined this love of Halloween and this idea of having people submit things, and we were already publishing books, some stories and things like that. And I just got this wild hair idea. I wonder if I could launch a call for submissions on October 1st and have a book to press by October 31st. Right?
That's pretty aggressive.
Yeah. And the first year was a blast. It's called Vampire Verse, VAMPYR was the spelling we used. Because if you do vampireverse.com, it looks like vampyreverse.com. And
that's fair.
So that was such a success, and I had so much fun with it. I had some professionals, some people from the Science Fiction Poetry Association, for example, submit things, some great stuff. But I also had a lot of people who didn't think of themselves as poets submit things. And a few people in particular who I could write back and say, there were a couple of things about this poem that you submitted that I loved. Line 3 and line 9 they just blew me away. But with those two lines, you've set a really high bar. If you go back and look at lines 5 and 6, and you've kind of, you lazied your way through those. And people would say, oh yeah, you're right, and rework it, and we would go back and forth and end up with this final polished poem. So I was really happy with the results. Did it again. The next year was The Hungry Dead. Then after that was Halloween Haiku, and last year did Cthulhu Haiku. Thought I'd, Cthulhu, see if I could gain a little bit more attention that way. And we did a Kickstarter that time. All of the previous ones were just, we committed to do the books. With the Kickstarter, part of the reason was that I thought it would gain a little bit more attention, specifically for a book with Cthulhu in the title.
Right.
And secondly, I made a commitment to pay the poets. Poets don't normally get paid. So I said, we're going to publish this book no matter what. I set a success level of $13. If we hit $13, we're going to publish the book. And, just crazy low number. And we ended up, and then I committed to $1 per half page. So basically we'd put a haiku on a half a page, 2 haikus to a page. A sonnet would fill 1 page. A longer poem might run several pages. People by then were sending in short fiction, and I find that poetry and fiction together in an anthology makes for a nice mix, because
right.
Poetry alone is like having a buffet bar that's nothing but desserts. You know, you can't eat,
or fruit.
You can't eat that much condensed material all at once. And putting some fiction in there gives you kind of a breather.
A buffer, yeah.
They really play nicely with each other. So that Kickstarter was successful enough that we were able to pay double what we had promised.
Okay.
And and stay in the black. That's all I care about. So this year we're doing Cthulhu Haiku 2 and more Mythos Madness, a follow-on to the original. Deadline for submissions is October 25th, so we're still looking for things. We'll get the ebook out to backers of the Kickstarter project by October 31st, by midnight, and then the print book will be...
Whoa, wait. Didn't you say the deadline was the 31st?
Deadline's the 25th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
I was like, well, how are you going to do that?
Yeah. So I've got 6 days after the deadline to finalize the book. Yeah. And that in itself is...
That's a little undaunting.
It is. Fortunately, right now, a lot of submissions are coming in. So I'm going through the sorting process and through the negotiation process of, would you adjust these lines in this poem? Or just, oh my God, that was... I have to share one with you.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
A haiku that came in the other day. Color of her eyes, one was green and one was blue. And one was hazel.
Very good.
Yeah. So there's one, and that doesn't need any work. It made me laugh out loud when I first read that one. So I just wrote back an enthusiastic, accepted, thanks. So the acceptance process is usually, ongoing with the submission process. And then that leaves me, we already have the cover done. That leaves me basically a long weekend of hard work looking at the whole body of things that have come in and trying to decide how best to arrange it. And that's actually a pleasure in putting a poetry book together is you don't just slam a bunch of stuff between covers. You need to find some sort of sense of story within the collection as a whole, or some chronological arrangement. The first one we did, I ended up with one short story submission, and I used it as midnight. So that was vampire verse. So all of the poems up to midnight were sunset, and that was all of the dark, really disturbing, dangerous vampire poems. Then midnight was a great short story, kind of weird short story, and then we did sunrise in the back half of the book, and that was the more lighthearted, joyful poems, or the funny poems, or the ones where vampires were losing. And that made a nice mix. But I realized this isn't a fiction or poetry blog. This is a gaming blog.
Well, this is a gaming blog.
Yeah.
But
okay.
It's as I become more of a writer, it's a reflection of who I am.
Okay.
So every now and then stuff pops up there. Oh, nothing this week because I've got 3 kids that are doing crazy band stuff. and you'll see stuff about my kids in band.
Right.
I mean, originally the blog was going to be a news and media thing, and it's a little bit rough, especially now that I'm working full time, to keep up with the blog and trying to start a writing career.
I understand.
And I would much rather write than make potato chips.
Yeah, though, I work a day job as well, and I have worked for game companies in the past full time.
Well, I would really like to get a job working from home for a game company. That would be ideal.
The one thing I'm going to say there, while there are joys to that, like I worked for Game Designers Workshop. That was the first place, and so people might, your viewers might know me from 2300 AD was my project. Dark Conspiracy was something that I wrote from scratch. I worked in Space 1889 on some of the adventure modules and did a board game for that, Temple of the Beastmen. Then went on to work for TSR and did the Planes of Chaos boxed set with Wolfgang Bauer.
Yes, it was Wolfgang Bauer.
And then Dragon Dice was the big thing I did for TSR.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I still have some of those.
Yeah, cool. I had a blast. So what I was going to say there is I had a blast working on all of that stuff, but I don't own any of that stuff. I don't get... It's all work for hire, and it's all...
right.
It's almost all other people telling you...
Right,
what,
but... Would you say that working for those game companies was a different challenge every day mentally?
Yeah.
Mostly.
Yeah, I mean, for example...
That's what I need.
Okay.
Right now I'm a button pusher. And
I'm just here to champion button pushers because, my day job right now, love the educational company I work for. Once again, I don't own anything. Other people's name goes on the work that I do, right?
And you don't get a lot of credit for a lot of the stuff you write.
Right.
I mean, you get with the game companies, the stuff that you pretty much did, you got credit for, but it's not like you get royalties.
Right, exactly. Some people, some bigger names in the industry, they've managed to work out a sweeter deal. But what I'm saying is that having a regular day job and then doing what you love on the side gives you complete freedom and complete ownership and complete responsibility for what you do on the side. So I can decide, like last fall as we were finishing out, last fall right before we started the Cthulhu Haiku, I had a card game I had designed that I was just using poker cards to play called Invasion of the Saucer People. It's a 1950s style sci-fi cooperative, all the players against the invading saucer people trying to defend the inner planets. And my grandson, who was, I think, 9 when I introduced him to it, he just loved that game. Every time he'd come to visit, Grandpa, can we play Invasion of the Saucer People? So I thought, I know a bunch of artists in the industry.
Bingo.
If I could raise enough money to pay them to illustrate, the only part of the mix that was missing was I knew I wanted to do print-on-demand cards. I didn't want to commit to $12,000 print run through U.S. Playing Card Company, and then have cards in my garage that I'm selling, out of my garage. What I wanted was what we were doing with books, which is I use CreateSpace to do our print books. So they're listed on Amazon. Amazon does the sales. CreateSpace does sales in a few other places. At the end of each month, they drop the royalty money in my bank account, and then I pay our authors. And ebooks, once again, Kindle digital publishing. We do some things through Barnes & Noble for EPUB. I'm definitely going to be putting things on Drive-Thru Fiction, mainly because this year they did a Feeding America drive, and I want to be in that bundle. They did this for $20. You can get a bundle of it's like $175 worth of books from these different
the
publishers.
drive-through bundles are always pretty insane.
Yeah. And the money then would go to Feeding America, which is an organization that Popcorn Press has already been backing. So I very much believe in those. And now I've lost my train of thought. So anyway, you've got the freedom, and
and that is good. But my wife doesn't quite make enough for me to just go and freelance right now. So I need something. And my job is just my cooking background. Even though I'm making a decent wage, I am so wasted at my current job. Is where I'm at. It's just I go home every day. And we have to wear special headgear, and it gives me a headache. So I come home with a headache.
I gotcha.
There's a lot of heat in the summer, or even in the fall months, there's a lot of heat and dehydration. So I come home dehydrated every day, even though I drink 2 gallons of water.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's time to move on. And I would, ideally, using my theology degree in cooking would be my best choice. But that's a pretty hard mix.
Like maybe turning water to wine, or
that would be a real hard mix. I'm not that faithful. But then I think the gaming industry would be next ideal.
Yeah, there's a lot of joy in seeing people play things and hearing them laugh or curse across the table at each other.
There is. I mean, I have a ton of experience judging. I have some playtest experience behind me. I've even written some alternate sets of rules that aren't yet in print, which when they do come in print, I'm not even sure I'm going to get full credit for them.
Okay.
But they're done. They're things I have done, and I started talking with Silvervine Games here at the show about making a miniatures rules system based off of their combat system.
Okay.
Specifically for the game, but I like D10, and their role-playing game is a D10 system.
All right.
So I want to kind of try and figure out how to make that work on a miniatures table.
All right. Well, it sounds like you're on the path.
I'm on the cusp.
I started in a factory. I spent 8.5 years in a factory, so I understand I don't like working in the heat and the headaches at the end of the day, and feeling like my theology degree isn't being put to use at all.
Well, but part of it too is I'm not dull-witted, and it's just like I go to work and I'm like, I am so much better than off, on, off, on. I mean, I went to college for 4 years. At least with my cooking background, it's a challenge in the sense of the menus change on a regular basis, and there's a certain amount of creativity in it. But anyway, not about me. You have at least one game here. Monster...
actually, at the table, I have Invasion of the Saucer People and a booster pack we put out for that. And maybe I'll just list them all, and then I can go back to an overview of them. So that, Wolfman's Curse, which is not an Are You a Werewolf game. It is an Everybody is a Werewolf in Victorian England. Yeah, it's... the opening text says, Victorian England is a wonderful place to live if you're wealthy and if you're not a werewolf. Unfortunately, your family fortune has been squandered and you've been bitten by a wolf with a gypsy curse. So can you restore your family fortunes without killing the local peasantry or being hanged by Scotland Yard?
That says everything about the game right there.
There you go. It's a real backstabber of a game. Then MonsterCon... Yeah, the Invasion Kickstarter I did funded illustration of Wolfman's Curse as well. So that was a very successful Kickstarter for us. MonsterCon, I set out to do one deck. Frankenstein, Dracula, Frankenstein's monster. We call him Frankie. Frankie, Dracula, the werewolf, and the mummy. And the premise with them, I'll just go ahead and describe these things. The premise is those four monsters are all in love with the same horror movie starlet, Desiree Delamorte, her name is. And she is the guest of honor at MonsterCon this year. So they show up to see if they can get close enough for one of them to snag her and run off, right? So
Right.
they're all in competition.
Classic horror movie concept.
Yes.
It's great.
But without drawing enough attention to themselves, that the congoers realize, hey, that's not a costume, and jump on them, and drive them out. So it's the try not to get an angry mob going. So that's another one of the screw your neighbor kind of games. Each one of those monsters has a special ability. Dracula has mesmeric gaze. Once per hand, he can force somebody else to take the trick. So if this is really bad for you,
So it's a Pinochle-esque game.
I don't know. It's a card game.
Okay. Well, you said take the trick, so I was figuring it's kind of like they kind of do it. And
Yeah,
the goal is not to win the trick, though.
Well, unless it's got a Desiree Delamorte card in it, and you want that one. So I've heard somebody say, "Oh, so it's kind of like hearts, but like
Which
spades."
it's a Pinochle.
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
both. They're similar, but with different nuances. Yeah.
So each of the monsters has a special mess over the game power. That Kickstarter was successful enough that it actually funded illustration of Return of MonsterCon, which is Amorphous Blob and the Alien Changeling and the Invisible Man and who am I forgetting? There's one other monster in there. And then another deck, Son of MonsterCon. It's just Bride of Frankenstein and The Undertaker and Phantom of the Opera and Ghost of Room 13. And another deck, the MonsterCon Cthulhu pack, which Cthulhu Cultist, the Innsmouth Cousin, Nyarlathotep is there in Avatar, and Hickman's Apprentice. So I didn't quite. I had two other decks: a slasher pack that I'll come out with eventually. The guy with the chainsaw, the guy with the hooks for hands, and the Xenophobe deck, which is basically an alien predator species, and I forget the other one I had in there. They are not exactly those because I don't want to get sued, obviously.
Right. Close enough.
Len Peralta's art just makes them delightful. And you can mix and match monsters from different decks or just add them all together. I have not played all of them together. I got an email from a guy in Chicago who said he did. 16 people sitting at the table playing this game together with 16 different powers. And when you've got something like the Bride of Frankenstein's power is a piercing scream. Anytime she sees another monster use its power, she screams. Everybody has to hand her a card at random. She takes a card out of her choice out of her hand, shuffles them up, deals them all back out. So, or Nyarlathotep, who every time he captures a Desiree Delamorte card has to take everybody's cards in and randomize them, because he's the god of madness. So, your hands are going to be changing from moment to moment. It sounds wacky. And then we just finished a Kickstarter. I don't actually have the game for sale yet. Proof decks are in the mail coming back to me to make sure the print runs fine, called Clashing Blades. It's a 2-player sword fighting game using poker cards. So what we did was, we just said this is a poker deck, a specially illustrated poker deck with some rules on some of the cards to define what game effect they specifically have. It's a pretty easy game to pick up. It's actually the first card game I ever designed, like 15 or 20 years ago, and your viewers will probably know Jeff Grubb. He was.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Jeff was like, yeah, you should publish this. You should publish this. You should publish this. And it's just only now has the option come along for doing print on demand. DriveThroughCards.com. I swear by them. They're great. Great folks.
That's probably where my first game will go.
Yeah.
I think I've got a miniatures game I've kind of been working on, but miniatures are really expensive. Miniature games are expensive to develop, so it's certainly not going to be the first game I publish.
Yeah. Well, and
the rules could be done probably in the next 3 or 4 months, edited and everything, and up on drive-through. But people like eye candy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the toy factor.
And this set of rules would have no art either, and I kind of want some art with it when I'm done.
Well, and that's what the Kickstarter's for.
In time.
Okay.
In time. I have... It's a very vast world. And actually, it started off as a science fiction type of thingy, and then I'm like, we started this, and I'm like, I really like fantasy, so I just made this fantasy world. I'm like, I'm going to make them both work together. So now I'm actually in the process of making the timeline to see, like, when the aliens hit, and I'm going to tie some aliens into the fantasy world.
Okay.
And they're going to be present in the future. So I'm working out some kinks that I created, because in the miniatures game, what I want to do is I wanted to create solos that were powerful enough that they could be played alone against entire squads.
Okay.
And balance it. And I'm about at that point where in my play tests, at least the way I play my guys, I understand the game a lot better than everybody else. They have a fighting chance.
Okay.
In 50-50 chance pretty much of winning when I play them. My boys don't have the same miniatures experience I have. They don't do quite as well.
Right.
But I think it's there. Now it's time to start getting ready to branch out and play test for the people.
Okay. Well, and that's, cons like this are a great thing for setting up those kind of events.
I'm actually thinking I'm going to approach Catalyst maybe, or DreamPod 9. I don't know if DreamPod 9 wants to deal with another game, but I'm a play tester for them, so I might be able to get them to play test the game.
Right.
I don't know if they charge me for that or not, but they've got a big volunteer pool.
Okay.
So I'll use that and try and be in charge of looking at everybody's references. That's the undaunting part where I won't be that well at it. I'll have to call on my wife. My better half. So, what is next after this Kickstarter is come to fruition?
All right. Well, I like to say that 2013 has been my experiment. Having been successful with publishing books, kind of got that down. This has been my experiment with, can an old game designer get, who's been away from the hobby for a little bit, can he generate a little bit of heat enough to, maybe build a little following? Are there still fans of mine out there alive? And what I found is, there are. There are certainly people willing to support. So the idea was to launch with card games because I knew I could get after the first one, I was confident that I could get the art for them. The game designs are nice and crunchy. You can play test them, and there's not a lot of rules text to generate. Right. It's like a poem. It's got to be good. It's got to stand up to scrutiny, but there's not a lot to generate. Then I'm currently, this year I've started at some conventions running role-playing play tests with an adaptation of an old role-playing game I did. And so we're calling this one Lester Smith's Core RPG Rules. It's a D6 times D6 system.
Interesting.
Play any kind of genre. It's something where literally, I ran it at QuinCon in Quincy, Illinois for the first time this year, and I had I had 6 players. One was a 13-year-old girl who had never role-played before. One was a guy who sat down and said, this is a play test, I have a history of breaking game systems, so if it can be done, I'm going to do it. So I had that.
That's a weird balance.
And then a couple of people who were they're regular role players, but they showed up, and the setting was, you are ghosts of people who have died before your time, and you all show up in this kitchen together, and there's a murder mystery to solve. Eventually, you figure out. Within 15 minutes, everyone at the table had a character built from scratch. So that's
good.
The strength of the system is that really fast you've got this great concept for your character, and you've got the basic mechanics for how it works. This is partly, I had a challenge from an old friend, Tony Lee, game designer. Some years ago we were working for Ken Whitman, and Tony and I were talking. Tony said, I think you could get a game down to just 2 stats, mind and body. And I said, I bet you I can get it down to 1 stat. And I thought about it and came up with this system where you choose a number of abilities, and whatever that number of abilities is, that's your focus number. And so that's the number you're rolling against. For anything that you're trying to roll high on a d6 times a d6. And for every 10 points above your focus number, you get a bonus to what you've done. For anything that you don't know, you can still try to attempt it, but you're trying to roll below your focus number. So if you pick a lot of skills, that focus number goes up.
It goes way up.
It means that you've got a lot of things that you can do. You're a jack of all trades, but your chances of getting really good success at them are lower because you're trying to, if you have 12 skills, you're trying to roll above a 12.
So you really want the characters to be focused.
Well, or you could, if you wanted to be a neurosurgeon, you could just pick that as your one thing, and then you got the one skill, but then you got no chance of succeeding at anything else.
You want, it's a D6, so you probably want, ideally, probably not more than 4 or 5.
Well, it's a D6 times a D6. So the number range becomes this quasi-logarithmic.
Well, yeah, there's a weird arc to it.
Yeah, a lot of cluster at the bottom, and then it starts jumping, but the ultimate range is 1 to 36.
Right.
So that was in the original game, and I picked that up and just added a couple of tweaks, and the idea is to present that set of core rules. So chapters like the ghosts of the people who've died before their time, a fantasy world. One of my best friends is Doug Niles, and he did 20 years ago a set of novels, the Watershed trilogy. And so Popcorn Press is publishing the ebook version of that, in the next couple of weeks. We'll have the first of the books out. The print books are still owned by, I think, Random House, but they're out of print, I believe. So we're going to use his as the default fantasy world. He's got this wonderful, wonderful system. There are 3 types of water. They're divided by this mountain range. These 3 gods were battling. One of them's the god of magic. One was just like the basic god, and then one's this evil god. And so one of the waters is regular water, and Delphica, I believe is how it's pronounced. It's where all the humans live. One of the waters, so this other side of the mountain is where all the elves and other magical characters live. And then the last part is where the terrible, horrible dream stealer servants live.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and then we're going to do the sun-moon hoax. Back in the early 1800s, the first penny presses, one was called The Sun, and Benjamin Day, I think, was the editor. It's this was the very first penny press in the United States. And he had a British astronomer come to him. His father was another British astronomer, member of the Royal Academy. So this guy's got all of the credentials. And he claimed that he had built a huge telescope out in the American Southwest with which he could see details that even his father hadn't been able to see. So some new moons of Jupiter and so on. Some stuff that turned out to be true. But he could also see the surface of the moon much more clearly than had ever been seen before. And there were waterfalls, and there were people with butterfly wings, and there were it was just crazy. And so these news stories went out in the Sun for a period of like a couple of weeks, I think. I mean, it was definitely more than just a few days. And everybody in the United States was apparently believing it.
I've never heard this before.
Yeah. And then it became revealed, no, this was just all a hoax. So, but I thought, that sounds like an interesting world. You know, if you could get to the moon, and it actually did have all of these things on it. So we're going to do one of those settings, and the horror setting, and a bunch of other things, just to show how adaptable the game system is.
That's good.
I'm currently debating on how exactly... I want to make the basic rules kind of share and share alike, or open source, or something like that. But I'm debating the best way to term that, the best license to pick up.
Use, yeah. I know nothing about licenses, but if he's still here, Ryan Rawlings works with Silvervine Games. He is a lawyer. He might be able to tell you at least where to look.
I think I met him last night.
He's one of the two guys in the kilts.
Okay.
Silvervine Games shirt. You probably did meet him last night. He's here. He's been bouncing around. I don't know if he's still here today because he was done running events yesterday.
Okay.
But they usually stick around until almost the end of the show to pack up their stuff.
Okay.
That they share a booth. Usually while they run events, they have somebody else sell their product.
All right. I'll have to look.
I will. If I see him, I'll send him your way.
All right.
For sure.
Yeah, I would love to get some advice on that.
Yeah, he's no longer. He was 6 months ago. I guess he was an independent lawyer, so he was like self-employed. But now he's working for a firm, I suppose. So he'll probably be able to tell you where to go. I think he did all the legal stuff for Silvervine Games.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure on that, so don't quote me. But yeah, I didn't even know he was a lawyer until last night. We were hanging out. We were chatting about stuff with the game and talking about possibly making a miniature set of rules. And I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds good. We could do that because they made this whole big airship game, and they use all these miniatures to push everything around. And I think if they actually had miniature set of rules that would apply to it, they'd have a much easier time. But they don't. None of them ever really played miniatures games, so they haven't. You know, I can see why that would never cross their mind.
Right. But yeah, it sounds natural.
Well, I'm a minis guy, and I like D10 games. I played Void for years, and then Void was at the time they were the only company that stood a chance against Games Workshop, and somebody embezzled some money or something like that, and the company pretty much went belly up.
There have been a few stories like that in the.
It seems to happen a lot in the gaming industry, actually.
Well, I don't know if I'd say a lot, but
I've heard enough about it.
It's not entirely unusual.
Yeah, it's not entirely uncommon, and it's more common than I would think it should be.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it shouldn't happen ever, but I've heard at least 6 or 7 stories in the last 5 years. Now, some of those date back to, maybe as early as the 90s even. So, I mean, it's widespread, but you kind of don't hear about that as much when it's involving, food industry. Yeah. I'm sure it happens, and it probably actually happens more. They're just better at it. Yeah. But, what else? Where's that?
After that, so that's the D6x6 game, and I'm using that as a lead up to, I've been working on a role-playing game, I swear, for, again, 15 years.
A lifetime.
Well, ever since Dark Conspiracy. My attack with Dark Conspiracy, I wanted a world that a game master could bring any plot into, so that would handle pretty much any near modern horror. You could find some place in dark America to plant this haunted house or this kind of cyberpunk sort of horror story or whatever. You could run people back and forth. And I wanted a game, the GDW crowd, there was a lot of military interest there.
Yeah,
They liked a lot of books of guns.
If I remember GDW correctly, they have a lot of like board type-ish games that are hexagonal maps.
They did. They started out as historical war games was mainly what they put out, and then Traveller was their first role-playing game, big science fiction game. It was like the second really noticeable game in the industry. So you had Dungeons and Dragons, and then Traveller.
Then you had Traveller. And it's still it's changed hands, hasn't it? Traveller is no longer.
It's still. I think it's owned by Far Future Enterprises, which my understanding is Mark Miller, the originator.
So it's just changed company names.
Yeah, and he tends to license properties out for other people to manage and publish. But I'm kind of talking off the top of my head there because I haven't followed where exactly Traveller is. I know Dark Conspiracy's been reprinted several times and by different publishers, and there's a new version out from some guys, three with the number 3 Hombres. They're based in England. Again, great guys. So that was, I wanted that. You can fit anything in, and then I needed to I wanted real horror. So, but I also had to appeal to the GDW game crowd, who liked big guns and weaponry and stuff. And so, very frequently would set things up so that you would go in, you would start investigating something, get your ass kicked, but armed with that knowledge, go gear up and come back and encounter it again and kick its ass. And that was kind of the default rationale, at least, that I used. But I've wanted to do a game world that's even bigger and more all-encompassing, something that could handle Beowulf all the way up to Hellraiser Bloodlines, which is like, or Alien, or so set in the future, and something that the game master could maim or kill a character, and yet as a player you would still have this sense of continuity. So I've got this game online. You can see the first few chapters of what I've developed so far, called When Shadows Rise. So whenshadowsrise.com. And it uses a D13 system, which is a D10 read 0 to 9, plus a D4. Which gives you this weird, it's almost like a regular D10 roll, except you got 2 dice clacking together. I'm a firm believer in having dice clacking together in your hand, I think that's important. But then you've got these steep curves at each end, 1, 2, 3, and 11, 12, 13. The rest of it is just, there's a 1 in 10 chance of getting any of the numbers from 4 to 10.
Right.
And so it makes it an easy game for game masters to set modifiers to. And if you ever roll doubles, so that's down at the bottom end, double 1s, double 2s, double 3s, or double 4s, the only chance of doubles, then something special happens. If you ever roll a 13, that's an automatic horrible failure.
Oh.
And then there's a set of psychic power rules. Psychic powers don't come into play very often, but there is a chance in each. Basically, in this game, the game master is going to hand you a journal book and say, all right, this adventure is set in 1937 in New England. And we're going to take a couple of minutes and we just randomize some characters. And so you'll play that adventure that way, and your character might die. And that's 1 or 2 pages in your journal book. Next adventure, that one was over. You know what? I want to do San Francisco, and it's 2011, and here's what's going on.
Right.
And so you've randomized some more characters. And again, I've got a pretty fast character randomization system. As that journal book builds up, some of these characters can start realizing that they're all incarnations of the same angelic thread. And actually, at the beginning of the game, you generate what your angelic persona is. And that has something to do with your ongoing personality. Okay? So that's the thread that draws everything together, and with a little bit of magic, with a little bit of psychic power, which tends to be like the carry sort of, I can try to activate this. There's a chance it's going to run out of control, burn through my life force, cause some horrible, horrible effect beyond what I wanted to do. But, I need those keys off of that, off the jailer's belt. So I'm going to try to telekinesis them over here. And so, you got this journal, and then some of your incarnations may start to become aware of others of their incarnations, and so you can start to draw on previous characters, or you might have two that are alive at the same time. You suddenly remember, wow, I know there's this old guy who knows about this information. We should go talk to him. How do you know? I'm not sure how. Well, it's one of your previous incarnations. So that's the idea. When Shadows Rise.
I have a similar idea to that.
Okay.
I want to make, in my game system, I want to make a race that the genealogy of what your previous ancestors have done is passed on to some degree. Mm-hmm. So you might be, your mother, 10 generations removed, might have been a thief, so you get some kind of trait from her.
Oh, okay.
And then somewhere down the line, maybe somebody was a cleric, so you inherit a trait from that.
Okay.
I'm having a hard time putting it into both worlds, the futuristic one and the fantasy one, in the sense that, well, how far can you go back all the way to the fantasy world?
Right.
And what would you inherit? I am not far enough along, really, in both of the two worlds to make it work. And it probably won't work in the miniatures game, but it would be a really cool race for an RPG.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, being able to draw on your past lives.
Yeah, well, it's very similar. I was thinking, like, well, okay, you'd have to do it all at random, so maybe you're actually the first one, so maybe you're the third generation, so you would get less, sort of. I don't know. There's the weird balancing tier there that I need to really work on. Or if you're the third person, maybe you don't get it. Maybe you always get a set number of powers / abilities as your feats or traits, and it's just more spread out the older your family generations are. See, you just worked it out for me.
All right.
Anyway, I think I'm about out of film.
Okay.
So
and I'm about out of talk.
Oh, that's good timing. I think we have like 2 minutes left.
All right.
So, Matt Lemke with Lester Smith of Popcorn Press at Con on the Cob 2013